I was fortunate enough to snag an NVIDIA RTX 4090 Founders Edition from Best Buy. Welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be taking you through the disassembly of an RTX 4090 Founders Edition graphics card and how to install that into an EKWB Vector 2 Waterblock with an active backplate. This may seem like a daunting task if you've never done it before, but once you do it, you'll find that it's not that difficult and it's fairly easy to do. Even if you typically don't wear ESD protection, I would highly recommend doing so when you're installing a graphics card into a Waterblock, as you are going to have the graphics card in a very vulnerable position by stripping down to just the PCB and exposing it to potential electrostatic discharge. With the amount of money that graphics cards cost nowadays, I would hate to see anyone's GPU get fried just from static electricity. With all that said, let's get to it. So here we have an NVIDIA RTX 4090 Founders Edition and an EKWB Active Backplate Vector 2 Waterblock for the Founders Edition that I'm going to be showing you how to install today. Unfortunately, I had a catastrophic hard drive failure, which I lost the original footage of installing this into the Waterblock. So I'm just going to go over the main features, not actually uninstall and reinstall, as there's not a lot of extra steps past taking the PCB out and putting the PCB into the Waterblock. If it looks like there's condensation and water in the Waterblock, it's because there is. I did test the flow pattern in the previous video, and I'll be going over the results on how you can configure this Waterblock and how it works with the active backplate. So I'll go ahead and tear down this 4090 heatsink and show you what you're going to need to do to get the PCB out of the heatsink and how to put it into the Waterblock with the active backplate. So to start, there's a magnetic shroud right here that you're going to be able to use this little notch right here to get a tool into and push it up and then take it off, as it is only magnetized on. EK sends this tool along with their Waterblock. It's for standoff tightening and loosening, but it also has this end which assists with removing the power plug out of the Waterblock, as well as assisting in getting this magnetized piece up off of the heatsink. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert this in. As you can see, this shroud is pulling up a little bit. You can get your thumb underneath of it and continue to pull up. And as you can see, it's magnetized on with a couple pins on this side, but taking this off reveals screws that you're going to need to remove to get further into the heatsink and remove the backplate completely off of the PCB. So there's going to be a variation of what appears to be Torx bits and Phillips head screws that you're going to have to remove. You're also going to have to remove the backplate here as well. You're also going to have to use a Torx bit on the back 6 screws here to remove the backplate to further remove the PCB from the heatsink. I'm going to go ahead and remove all these screws and move on to the next step. These are not captured screws, so make sure you're keeping them in a safe place so that you're not losing them. So that's the back plate, and as you can see, there are heat pads that have been applied to the back plate that sit on the back of the PCB. So it may take a little bit to come off initially, but once you get it off, that's all that's holding it on is a total of 8 screws. And underneath right here would be where the PCB would lay. This bracket would be on the back side of the PCB. And in fact, let me actually get the Waterblock with the PCB on this side so that we can see that. Okay, so this is the PCB installed in the Waterblock. And as you can see, these screws right here are what this bracket was attached to. So this bracket would sit right on the back of here, and it would put tension on the front of this heatsink to pull it against the GPU. Now, this Waterblock does not need this bracket, so it just has screws that came with the Waterblock to use. So to get the PCB out of here, you would just go ahead and remove these 4 screws. So you want to loosen these evenly to allow the pressure to release evenly on the PCB. Once that's fully loosened, you can remove it. And then we can go ahead and take the back plate off. So to do that, it's another different size Torx bit, but you can go ahead and remove that screw, tip it on its end, and remove the screws off the back. The back plate is now removed. So the only thing holding the PCB on would be the thermal paste attached to the IHS, as well as these three cables right here. These three cables can easily be removed. I'll demonstrate on this board right here. So to remove these ribbon cables, there's going to be a black end piece right here that you're going to go ahead and flip up. That's going to unlock the ribbon cable, and you're going to be able to just lift it out and pull it out very gently. This one here is going to be slightly different, as it has a whole sliding mechanism that you're going to want to push all the way to the right, and that's going to release the cable, and you can go ahead and remove it that way. This plug over here is going to be the same as this one. You just lift this black tab, and then you can very gently remove the ribbon cable out of it. These plugs are not going to be used on the EK Waterblock, so we can just leave these tabs the way they are, or you can put them back the way that they were with the ribbon cables connected. Just make sure you remove all three cables before doing so. Okay, so once these ribbon cables are removed from the PCB will be able to be lifted off of the heatsink. Now there's not going to be anything attaching it anymore to the heatsink, but it's going to take a little bit of force to peel it up and off because of the thermal paste. So it's going to feel a little scary to be pulling on a PCB like that, but a little bit of firm pressure and even pressure, just pulling it up and wiggling it a little bit and loosening it up will get the PCB off, and then it will just come completely off. Once that's done, you can clean up the IHS and reassemble everything that we just did in reverse order, starting with this right here. So we can reattach this. So this is reattached. It doesn't have to be tight, just so that it stays. I'm gonna go ahead and reattach the back plate here. Don't worry if this falls out, we can put that back in later. This piece just sits here over top of the LED, and you can just rest it back in there. So we'll go ahead and reinstall this screw. Once the rear I/O shield is on, we can go ahead and put the back plate back over top of everything and reinstall all of the screws. And finally, you can reattach the magnetized back plate just by getting these pins in the front end first. And pushing down. And your heatsink's reassembled. It has all of the parts. In case if for some reason your graphics card would ever fail, you can reinstall it back into the heatsink and send it off for RMA, and you have all of the original equipment. That way NVIDIA is not going to be able to say anything to you when you go to RMA it. The Waterblock is extremely easy to get apart. You're just going to remove this magnetized panel over top of the port block right here. It's going to expose 3 screws, and you're going to remove those 3 screws that attach into the top water block, and then you're going to remove all of the Phillips head screws out of the acrylic, and it's just going to pull right apart. It's super simple, super easy, and it goes back together the exact same way it comes apart. When you get the PCB out of the heatsink, it's going to have thermal paste on the GPU, which is directly on the other side right here. You're going to want to clean that off with cotton swabs, microfiber cloths, and alcohol. Just get all of the thermal paste off of the GPU IHS, That way it's ready for new thermal paste. Once you're clean of the old thermal paste, you can go ahead and apply thermal paste just like you would on a normal CPU. Just make sure you get a full coverage. And once that's complete, you're gonna use the tool that was sent along with EKWB's Waterblock, and you're going to remove these standoffs right here. Once you remove these standoffs, you can just take the PCB, set it into the top of the Waterblock, and then reinstall these standoffs here and all of these screws as well that you took out to get the cardboard that was in here out. You're gonna reinstall all those screws, you're gonna reinstall these standoffs, and that's gonna pull the PCB onto the top part of the Waterblock. So as you can see, it's gonna put it onto this Waterblock, and this jet plate is gonna sit on top of the GPU. One other thing that you're gonna do before installing the PCB is you're gonna cut and size a bunch of thermal pads based on thickness according to the instruction manual of the EK Waterblock. That's gonna take a little bit of time. To be honest, that was the longest part of this entire assembly, was cutting and placing these thermal pads, but once you get it, you just place them down and they'll go and smash up against the Waterblock right here, and everything will work out and look good. If you do happen to see that some of the thermal pad is sticking out, you can go ahead and trim it some more and replace the PCB onto the heatsink or the Waterblock right here. So once this is installed into the top of the Waterblock and tightened down, you're gonna go ahead and cut more thermal pads and apply them according to the instruction manual. As you can see, there are some on the top of the Waterblock here that stuck when I took it apart. These go over top of the GPU die. This little one is gonna sit on top of this one right here. So that is something that you're gonna have to do. So once you have these thermal pads installed, you're ready to install the backplate, which is just gonna slide on the exact way that you took it off. One thing to note is to make sure that these O-rings right here on the Waterblock are inserted right here, as that's gonna seal against the port block. So these look good. I can go ahead and slide this active backplate into place. So now you can go ahead and replace all of the screws that you took out of the acrylic block. Okay, once you get the screws tightened into the acrylic portion, we can go ahead and put the screws into this slot right here. And then you can just magnetize that back on, and your 4090 is now installed into the EK Waterblock's Vector 2 with an active backplate. So even though it has an active backplate, this port block is designed in a way that you only need one in and one out. Now it is recommended to go into the port that goes directly to the jet plate, so that would be this one. And then you can either come out this one, or you can come out this one. The only configuration that is not recommended is to go in and out on the same side. My configuration is I'm gonna come in this port and come out this port, and it's gonna flow through both the back and the front side. So this is now ready for install into AlphaSource. Now that the GPU has its Waterblock installed and is ready for a custom loop, the next step is gonna be the final wiring and cable management, as well as reassembly of the Antec cannon. I'm really excited to see what kind of temps the EK Vector 2 with the active backplate is gonna provide the 4090 with, and there's gonna be a lot of fun that we're gonna have testing that out once the build is finished. It's also gonna look really cool in the case, so I'm really excited to get everything finished and wired up so that I can see what it's gonna look like. If this video helped you to understand a little bit more about how to disassemble a GPU and install it into a Waterblock, you can check out other helpful videos by clicking here. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.